Actually, what size of impact do you think the educational extension of the credit line will make? That seemed really interesting and innovative. Well, I guess first, how did you think about making that connection? And then how is that going?
So how do we think about making that connection? And this is, I think, the thing that is so remarkable about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship at its core is solving the problem on the ground, right? You have your initial business concept, you have the plan that you put together, but then you actually get into the meat of the business and you're just solving the problem that is in front of your face. You're trying to constantly understand your customer better. So the idea for us, collateralizing the energy system to do something like serve a school fee loan, that came from us trying to solve this problem where literally 80% of our customers all stopped paying for 1 week in the same 1 week window. And we went, something is going on. How do we help them with this situation? How do we help them go through and succeed? In terms of the power, I think, so this is still fairly new for us. Over 90% of the customers, so we have very strict eligibility criteria for who's eligible for this type of loan. Over 90% of the customers we offered it to took it. And then we had less than a 2% default rate. So I think we're onto something huge.
So Jit, I've got the Stanford Engineering and Berkeley MBA, so yay. TV. So you keep showing the TV, and the biggest question that popped into my mind is, okay, I got the TV, but who's going to pay for the cable channels? So what content are they going to have access to on the TV?
Yeah, the TV systems are actually all sold. So you see this whole, we had the partnership with the telecom, but there's another big partnership now that has especially accelerated as a result of the World Cup this year, which is we have partnerships with satellite providers. And so all the satellite providers, this is where I say, we now have entire industries that are eager for off-grid energy to work because these were markets that they had no access to. They had no ability to sell a satellite system to a rural customer in sub-Saharan Africa because they couldn't power the satellite system. They couldn't power a TV to use it. And so we're coming in saying, well, we're solving that problem, but come in with a low-cost package. And we're gonna finance it all through pay-as-you-go, all through this digital payments platform, all together. And yeah, it's remarkable. So they come with satellite packages from all the major, Sky, StarTimes, Canal Plus, the major, mainly European and sub-Saharan African satellite companies.
I just want to say that's incredible vision. So when you started, how far do you have to plan ahead of your current project? How far is your vision ahead of you?
Great question. So, and I think it's one of the things. There's the things we have to do as entrepreneurs, and then there's the reality of entrepreneurship. So I'm sure, as I saw from many of your presentations, you had to put together a financial model. You have to put together a plan. And absolutely you have to, if you're going to go out and seek money, you have to have a plan, you have to have an idea. But then the reality is that when you're starting a company, when you're starting a new initiative, you have your line of sight. And especially for a technology startup in clean tech, it's usually on the order of 6 months to a year. That's the most that you're able to plan. I think experienced entrepreneurs, I've been around the block a few times, will tell you, you basically have line of sight to the point where you run out of cash.
This is a question for the transient team. What kind of a bridge do you see between that keynote address and your concept of mobility relative to nuclear? They're largely talking solar, but is there a bridge to what you're doing?
Thanks, that's a great question. One thing that comes to mind is that early on in our project, we probably won't have the regulatory hurdles cleared to be able to immediately deploy reactors. In addition to that, at least in the early few years, these reactors probably won't be finished with development. But we are planning to do we do have in our business model an idea for dispatching nuclear or renewable powered batteries, which we can use to build up that logistics network and sort of get some experience running our business on something similar. And I can imagine there might be opportunities there with sort of the battery dispatch service. So thank you.
So I'm going to add something because I got really excited when I saw that, when I saw the transient concept. And I think one thing I'm particularly excited about is ownership models and the fundamental business model around a lot of these energy systems all throughout, from upstream all the way to downstream retail. It's changing. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I wonder if rental could really work. So there's some really unique ideas in there.
My question is to you, Mr. Jeet. Thank you very much for your very inspiring presentation. I saw that you've already expanded to Nigeria. I'm Nigerian, so and the business fair in Nigeria is very difficult. So I'm wondering, like, how were you able to like overcome those hurdles you must have overcome, and also, like, what space do you see for other more established base load power sources in Africa? Because I think if you are just providing these basic home needs, like I don't think this drives industry, because this is where nuclear comes in. So, like, I don't know, are you looking into that for the future? Okay, are you considering this for the future, and like, what are your future plans, maybe to grow and expand in the energy space?
So great questions. I'll answer the first question because it's very easy. We are brand new to Nigeria, so we have not solved that problem. We have been there for all of 2 months. So we are just getting started in Nigeria. But fundamentally, the way, one of the things that we learned very early on as Phoenix is you have to be very close to your customer. And actually, this is something I've learned through all the different businesses I've started. You have to be very close to your customer to really understand, is the value proposition you think you're giving them the same value proposition they're actually buying from you for? So we do that. For us, that means we hire local staff, local talent, local leaders. We have an incredible leader in Nigeria. He's actually a Harvard MBA. He's Nigerian, Harvard MBA, went back, and he's now starting our Nigerian operation. That's the only way to make a business truly succeed. Now, to your second question, I think that's really, it's one that we face quite a lot, not just us as Phoenix, but actually broader as NG. We face this a lot. So NG, we have operations in off-grid solar through Phoenix, in mini grids and microgrids, and all the way up to large centralized generation plants, the development of transmission lines for different countries. So we're across the entire ecosystem. We commonly get this question, well, how does off-grid and mini grid and traditional baseload, how do these all work together? Okay, and this is why I say, you know, the modern energy ecosystem, it is going to be this combination of technologies. You are going to have a combination of distributed systems as well as traditional systems, and at a point they are going to start to meet and to merge. One of the things that we talk about a lot at Phoenix is how our model is very complementary to the grid. One of the biggest complaints about the grid in places like Sub-Saharan Africa, India, Southeast Asia, is it is unreliable. For a variety of reasons, you know, mismatch of demand and supply, theft, you know, poor transmission. And so as a result, there is actually a little bit of a mistrust for the grid. We will see customers of ours who are grid connected who will buy a solar energy and battery system simply because it is something that they fully control. But through this pay-as-you-go model, we now have the opportunity to offer products that are actually reinforcing the grid. So you can imagine something simple, the equivalent of a Tesla Powerwall for what is an on-grid home in Sub-Saharan Africa could be very powerful. It will replace a diesel generator, which is expensive, which is difficult to maintain. So our concept is much more, how do we use this idea of decentralized energy, of energy storage, and pay-as-you-go as a platform to now work both with the grid, but then also to provide energy access to off-grid areas. That's it.
I have a question over here for Shane for your group. Kind of going off of this, continuing, how do we make the transition from small solar powered systems into larger systems? Do you see a way that the ideas that you guys have in terms of branding and ideas around nuclear could be implemented in a region that currently doesn't have any nuclear at all to kind of prevent some of the anti-nuclear sentiment that we've seen in the United States?
That's an interesting thought. We hadn't looked too much into other countries, but it's interesting to think about how maybe pro-nuclear imagery could influence a country before large-scale infrastructure is built. And I know that, so I'm familiar with a few projects in China where we think about a country like China being able to have more power over what actually happens, but the public still can unite and overturn large projects like nuclear power, and maybe something like this would be able to mitigate those kind of concerns.
I think I can add to that because I'm from a country that doesn't have nuclear. So if you want to promote nuclear in such space, Thank you. I think maybe I'm lucky or kind of it's happened that I belong to this group. To promote nuclear in a place that doesn't have nuclear, many factors come to play. Politics, especially in the place I come from, and mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, politics is the most important. Like, you need to get those leaders, those guys are the big dogs. You need to get them. Like, they are the ones in control. If you can catch them, I think you will get like 90% success. Like, they have influence on most of the public, and they are the ones that control the economy and everything, and those big industries as well. If you can convince them, like, tell them how beneficial this can be to their business and how much money they can make. Just the same as the way it applies in US, like, businesses want to make profit, right? So same way it applies in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you promote nuclear and tell them how much money they will make and how good it will bring development and all whatnot to them, why not?
Hi, so this question is for Reactions for Action also, Shane. Given that you're planning to operate as a nonprofit, yet the end goal of advocating for nuclear is helping to make nuclear more successful, potentially change policy. If you're advocating with young people to change policies, that's against the rules of a nonprofit. So have you considered alternative vehicles that can work kind of simultaneously with your nonprofit to help you affect policy, because that's really the end goal?
So the things that we were thinking about as we were putting together ideas, we were thinking about causal brands like Product Red or Tom's. It's these companies where they have a message. They just want to be an influence for good in the world. We plan on, from what we've seen, there were some statistics from the NEI that we found that just when people are more aware of what nuclear energy is, their support for it goes up. So rather than doing direct lobbying or mobilizing people to go and talk to their legislators, we're more just promoting education of STEM in general and specifically nuclear science, because the trend is when people are more knowledgeable about it, they are more supportive of it. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm thinking specifically of, for example, in California, where we are considering shutting down Diablo Canyon, you really are not going to overcome the anti-nuclear rhetoric without some kind of advocacy that we should save, for example, that nuclear plant. So that goes into advocating for political action. So I'm just wondering if you have thought about it, because there are alternative vehicles like 501c4s, which allow you to do political work on a nonprofit basis. They're just not tax deductible. So it's something for you to be aware of, that a nonprofit has advantages as a tax deductible vehicle, but if you're not allowed to do public policy advocacy. So just to be aware of that, and sometimes people start a nonprofit that's a 501c3 and a simultaneous 501c4. So just to think about.
Thank you for that. That was actually, we had many conversations about profit versus nonprofit and what type of nonprofit, and that was something we definitely needed more mentorship, so thank you for that.
My question was also for reaction. So I noticed on your team, it's mostly engineers, and I think you had some business people as well. One of the big challenges with nuclear communication is sort of understanding how people perceive nuclear and how they perceive risk. So are you looking at maybe having someone from the communication science side to understand sort of people's risk perception around nuclear and help you craft better messages?
Yes.
Good answer.
I have a question for Jeet. So in the United States, the electrical grid and our production of that infrastructure has actually facilitated our technological boom in the last 200, 150 years. So what do you foresee as a sort of a pushback from the sub-Saharan African countries in terms of their own power generation or their own companies that could perhaps try to compete?
Yeah, so first of all, the market looks very different in sub-Saharan Africa. It's mostly state-owned utilities, or largely state-owned utilities and a single player within the market. They have traditionally been very skeptical and nervous about off-grid developers in any particular way. So it is constantly a concern. Like you said, governments are very important. Government relationships in each one of the sub-Saharan African markets that we work in are very important. However, that is competing against something else, and that is SDG 7, the Sustainable Development Goals. And all of these different countries have a very set goal for what they are trying to achieve in terms of energy access. And the reality that they face right now is that they've got two options. They can continue to extend the grid, but the grid does not pay back. Extending the grid into these rural, low-income areas, it's very expensive, and the end electricity consumption is minuscule. So as a result, they never pay back. So as a result, you're seeing a lot more openness now, especially with these new pay-as-you-go, lease-to-own type models, say, okay, yes, we don't see this as necessarily competitive. And so there's been a lot more openness. 10 years ago, 14 years ago now, when I was first in South Africa, this was one of the biggest problems. You were dealing with concessions. You actually had to spend years sometimes with the national utility saying, concede this off-grid area for us in order to be able to operate. But now it's starting to look a little bit different.
All right. And with that, I would like to conclude the question and answer period. And it looks like all our judges are back in the room. Jit and our teams, you may sit down.